So to start off then, I suppose we'll just get into the story of what eventually led you to blow the whistle with the NHS, things that you were noticing. You were obviously involved in child psychiatry, and you noticed a couple of things that then led you to blow the whistle on a lot of things that you thought were putting patients in danger and all of these kinds of things. So what kind of things were you seeing in your field that eventually led you down this path?
I think that it's important to give the context of how I ended up where I ended up. Child psychiatry is very, very poorly funded, and it always appeared that when we needed to save money, or when the government needed to save money, children's services were the first ones to be hit. Psychiatry in general suffers from that issue. So I would say I worked in child psychiatry for around about 20 years-ish. And in that time, it was always fairly poorly funded. And then there came a time, it was after 2008, and it seemed that the government were trying to make cuts everywhere. They started to cut corners, and staff were being moved around. So our teams were getting smaller, our patches were getting bigger. And for a long time, we just absorbed it. And then we had a new director who decided to change everything without an awful lot of discussion on the practicalities of this. So for a year or so, I was raising concerns about we don't have enough staff, this isn't happening, that isn't happening. And it just got slowly and slowly worse to the point where it was completely a dysfunctional mess, if I'm being honest. And I noticed that my staff were going off on long-term sick. And there was a point in which basically we had a new computer system that we couldn't access. We had everybody was off on long-term sick. I think I was the last person standing. Our notes were all over the place. We couldn't book patients. We didn't have a cleaner in the room. We didn't have our phones weren't working. They were being diverted elsewhere. And I discovered a box or several boxes of untyped letters that should have been typed 5 months ago. And we were told that they'd been typed. And I found one case in particular that should have been sent off urgently. It was a child with epilepsy that needed to be seen and treated by a neurologist urgently, and that had been sitting in a box for nearly 5 months. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the ramifications of this particular incident. It could have been fatal. If this wasn't dealt with urgently, it could have been fatal. Am I right saying that?
I am just very, very grateful to God that it did. Yeah. It wasn't fatal. It in other cases it would have been fatal. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank God indeed. Thank God indeed. And you mentioned, like obviously 5 months, not a long time, not a short time, sorry, whatsoever. It's a very, very long time for these notes to not be typed up. And then by typed up, you mean, because this was a thing I remember I had a little bit of confusion over myself, is that the way it works is when you generate these patient notes and stuff like that, and when you send them off to be typed, is for them then to be sent off to the specific department that deals with these incidences, so then they can reach out to the patient and decide where it goes from there. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah.
Perfect. So again, the 5 month hold up in this instance could have resulted in some very severe, very bad consequences.
Well, it wasn't just that case. There were boxes of untyped notes. So that was just the case that took, made me freak out, really.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
There were lots of other cases.
Just goes to show how many people can be affected. And you mentioned here something which I didn't pick up on last time, which I know you said last time. You mentioned your children's services are often the first to be hit by, whether it's budget cuts or funding issues. Is there a particular reason you know of why that is? Why as soon as like these things happen, they take them from the children's services and not anywhere else?
I think psychiatry, they would take it from psychiatry because it's always been considered a Cinderella subject. Even as a psychiatrist, I often felt that other doctors didn't take us seriously in what we were doing. So I think child psychiatry was the Cinderella to the Cinderella, in that often we were working with a deprived, a clientele that were quite deprived, and I don't think they had the same voice, let's say, as some places in the NHS would.
Mm. So, and when this new director came in, so we know a lot of the things I've seen, particularly with regards to NHS, when I spoke to other people and stuff like that, is when either new people come in, it's very much almost like new boss, same as the old boss, and the system just keeps trucking on, even though it's no good whatsoever. You mentioned the new director came in and basically was making all of these changes and stuff like that to the procedures you had in place. I'm assuming when you bring that up, they were having would I be right in saying they were having a detrimental effect, in your opinion, all of these changes that were being brought in?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Are we able to ask what changes were being brought in particular that you noticed that you weren't happy with?
I think the biggest one that hit us was that we had always traditionally taken up to the age 16. So we would deal with children at 16, and then at 16 they would go off to the adult services. Well, I would imagine, I don't know the statistics, but that whole 16 to 18 age group is a really, really difficult time for people. And I think it's a high use of psychiatry services. So we had a lot less staff, and we were being asked to cover the 16 to 18-year-old group. And so then you have the issue of where do you admit them to? Do we have admission rights? But then you don't have cover in the hospital with child psychiatry. It was a complete mess. Mm. It hadn't been thought through properly.
Mm-hmm. And especially
in my opinion.
Yeah, of course. And then you mentioned then the staffing issues compound on top of that. So you mentioned at one point it was basically just yourself trying to hold down this entire fort, so to speak. And you mentioned they were off on long-term sick. Is this just a consequence of, again, you guys having this unworkable system, all of these extra demands being placed on you, and just, again, not having the resources, both in terms of, fiscal resources, but then also in people, and it's just putting so much stress on people that they're basically being forced to go off on long-term sick?
Having seen what happened led up to people going off on sick, I would say that I could predict that person is going to go off on long-term sick soon, because I could see that they were at breaking point. Quite often they went off on long-term sick with something different. Let's say they would go off with chronic migraine or, I can't think, but, something, bellyache or something. But you knew that was coming, because the whole the weight of the work on certain people in our system was just unbearable.
So you see this like slow deterioration over time. You just see people who might have had a lot of more energy, like just naturally, a bit more extroverted or whatever, slowly becoming more, not introverted, but like just looking more fatigued and looking like they've got the weight of the world on their shoulders.
Well, I would suggest that my team were actually really a strong bunch of people. They were, they were dealing with some really, really major issues, child protection issues. They were a tough team. But there comes a time when, especially if somebody goes off sick in that system, and then all the work falls on someone else, and then that person can't cope, they go off on sick, then all of the two people's work falls on the third person. It's like a domino effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's a bit like, with people as humans, we're almost like a cup. There's only so much stress that we can take before things start overflowing, and when it overflows, we hit breaking point. And it just seems as though you had so many things that were just being lumped on top, all of these different things. You can imagine, I got a glass right here, ladies and gentlemen. If you just keep putting more and more water in, eventually it's going to overflow. There's only so much water that the glass can take. And as you mentioned, when it's quite easy, if I had a second glass here, I can spill out some of the water into the second glass, and it's a lot more manageable. But what was it like then when you were basically the only person? Was you basically feeling like, there's just no way that I can do this, that what the hell am I doing? What was going through your head at that time when it was just basically you holding down this massive fort?
It's a long time ago now. It was 2012, I think it was, when I whistle blew. I think there was an enormous pressure on me to flag up to the people that were in control how dysfunctional and dangerous it had become. So, excuse me, there was a lot of pressure on me.
Yeah. I can imagine. Because again, you've just got the weight of so many problems as well, ladies and gentlemen. We are talking about very serious problems, some of which we can't actually mention, but very, very serious incidents that these people do deal with on a daily basis. Some of which you wouldn't think happen in a country like Wales. You wouldn't think these things happen, but they do, and these people are on the front line dealing with it every single day. So yeah, when you say that, they're not weak people that we're talking about here, people like Lisa here, they're not weak people with the things that they have to deal with. So you mentioned the system was unworkable. There was this 5 months of typing that was not done. At this time as well, you were recording multiple, and I'll put an exact figure on how many it was, but like multiple of these near misses or these quite severe incidents per day. Are we able to talk about what kind of things that you were reporting in like these near miss incidents and stuff like that?
It could be anything. It could be going into your meeting with a patient and not having the notes. That to me is a near miss, because I have to sit there with a patient who is desperate for help, and I'm saying, I have no idea what's going on because I don't have your notes and I'm covering for somebody else. Or I could be, another near incident that I'm thinking of is that somebody was off on sick and I was asked to chair a meeting on autism diagnosis, which I didn't have the qualifications to do. And I didn't know any of the patients. So I was being asked to make decisions on diagnosis of patients I had never even met. I'm thinking sometimes the patient notes got sent to the wrong, this is confidentiality issue. Patient's notes would be sent to the wrong address. These are another time I was had to be escorted off the premises because there was intelligence to say that a set of parents were on their way to duff me up. All sorts.
I was saying that it's very sad because a lot of the things that are happening, a lot of the bad practices, policies that are leading to these kinds of things, they're not exactly within your control. You're just the people on the front line that are dealing with the problems that are being brought to you. You have policies by which you go by. And then a lot of the time when people either, for example, like when their patient notes get sent to the wrong house, or I think you've said some people, they've had issues when they're being discharged, when you have to say like, look, there's nothing more we can do. People are not happy about that stuff. The issue with like paperwork being sent to the wrong house as well is very, very concerning, because obviously it's not only very confidential information for what their case is and stuff like that, but you have like their address and stuff like that on there and their names. So again, if that gets into the hands of the wrong person who's not exactly all well there themselves, God knows what they're going to do. But with regards to I've just lost my train of thought a little bit there now. You guys being on the front line and suffering the consequences of the policies and almost like the backstage politics almost of the things that are going on. What's the worst that you've had? Is it that threat that came from the parents? They're saying they're going to come down and pose a physical threat to your safety and you had to be escorted?
I think psychiatry is every day your colleagues are being threatened. I mean, because of the nature of the job. People have been threatened with knives. We're dealing with really highly aroused, potentially dangerous people. Not so much in child psychiatry, I have to say, but obviously when that 16 to 18 age changed, we were dealing with a whole new genre of issues. And that.
Yeah, I can imagine, especially at that period, especially in like a young male's life, they start to go through, again, puberty. You have puberty onset, but then you start to go through some real changes at that point. A lot of testosterone flowing. If they don't have good outlets for these kinds of things, they can very easily get themselves into a lot of trouble. A lot of time, again, it just seems that people don't understand that, again, not only what the child will be going through, for example, or the teenager would be going through, but what you guys are going through as well. And I think it's good that you bring that up about how much is going on behind the scenes what you guys have to deal with. Because I think the next time somebody, hopefully, the next time somebody goes into one of these situations, whether in child psychiatry or psychiatry in general, if they're like a family member or something like that, they'll understand that there's a lot of constraints on you guys as well, and that the problems often stem from a lot of things high above you guys in the food chain, so to speak. It's just you guys end up dealing with all of the physical threats and stuff like that. I can't imagine there'd be too many instances where like the big CEO or whatever gets like a physical threat from a family member and has to be escorted off the premises. Although I could be wrong. I'm not making that claim. So then you mentioned then when you had this incident that you went into the office or wherever it was, you found all of these notes, 5 months worth of typing that wasn't done. Could have obviously led to some very, very drastic consequences due to them not being filed. You actually, when you decided to blow the whistle, you actually contacted your MP.
I did.
That's the way you had to go through it.
Yeah.
So you contacted your MP, who, again, I think acting in the best of intentions, sent a letter to basically what was the CEO at the time of who, your big boss. And then after that, seemed to be a quite quick chain of events of you being suspended, charges being brought forward. We're talking like wording in emails was changed, your DBS was removed, all of these things. So what was going on at this time? You've just said you're going to blow the whistle. You've contacted your MP. What happened then?
So if I give you the timescale, it was the end of November that I decided to contact my MP. It was around about the start of March that I got a letter back from the MP to say that he'd elevated it to the CEO, and this was the CEO's response, which was basically, oh yes, there's a lot of changes to the system and we can understand that people might be a bit uncomfortable at the minute. The very next day, I believe I was suspended from work. I was told not to turn up to my clinic, and it all kind of kicked off from there, really. To begin with, I wasn't told any of the charges, so it was quite Kafkaesque. I was suspended without knowing at all what I'd done wrong, and it wasn't until quite maybe 2 months later that I was called into a meeting and I was told the things that they were charging me with.
So when you mentioned there was a term, again, you used the term last time as well. I wanted to ask a little bit more what you mean by it, because I think a lot of people listening, they might not be familiar with Kafka and what you mean by Kafkaesque. What are you referring to when you say that it was very Kafkaesque, just so people can get an idea of the kind of stuff that you're referring to?
The writings of Franz Kafka, how he was kept in a situation where he was charged with something he didn't know for a long time, or I don't think he ever found out what it was. I forget the book, but I read it and thought, wow, that's exactly what they're doing to me.
So that you were charged with something, not told what you were being charged with.
Yeah,
but again, the whole thing with me, from the people that I've spoken to inside the system, is just seems it's very guilty until proven innocent. You always have to come back, and that seems to me to be the case across all kind of disciplines at the moment. It kind of gets me at the minute with YouTube as well. When I put videos out on YouTube, somebody, I think it's somebody, I don't know what's going on at the moment, but I've had some claims, for example, where I violated their like spam and deceptive practices policy and stuff like that. And every time that it's happened, it has gone away within a matter of hours. They said, no, you haven't done anything wrong. But it's like every now and again, it'll just come through. And I've had a lot sequentially recently. And it just seems as though the first thing they'll do, but if somebody reports it or you seem to be in violation of policy, they'll take your channel down like that, everything. And then again, you've got to then state why you haven't violated this policy. It just seems as, well, hang on, shouldn't you have already had that, your case made before you've done that? So you don't know what the charges are. And eventually when the charges are brought forward, you notice that wording of emails that I believe you said were in the patient notes has been changed to misrepresent what you've actually said. And I believe it was involving a very severe incident. We're not going to mention what that incident is, ladies and gentlemen, but you mentioned the wording of the emails was changed. So what happened with these emails?
So I was never allowed to have access to the actual email. The original email that I have to explain a little bit about this. I was asked to inform a local school that there was a potential security incident. I sent an email to the school to say blah, 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 blah. And I obviously wouldn't want you to raise this information with the children in assembly, flagging up that it was obviously a confidential email. I should probably have said this is a confidential email. It would have been much, much easier and less open to being distorted, but that's what I said. And when the charges come up, one of it was you have breached patient confidentiality. And the breach was the email that I had sent the school had been altered, and to say you obviously I would want you to tell all the children in assembly. So it sounds ridiculous. And the original email was in the patient notes, but that's what happened.
Such a small change as well. Such a small change, just from saying
a couple of letters. Yeah,
I don't want going from I don't want you to raise this to I do want you to raise this. Yeah. But obviously, it's such a small. It's just taking off 2 letters and a little bit of punctuation, ladies and gentlemen. But obviously, it massively changes what you've actually said. It massively changes the message that you've conveyed when none of it was true. None of it was true. And then this resulted as well. All of this resulted in your DBS being removed. And obviously that has a lot of unspoken things as well, especially when you're dealing with children. If you were to find out, you can imagine this yourselves as well, ladies and gentlemen, if you were to find out that somebody whom you know has worked with children, whether they work in a school, whether they work in child psych, whether they work in care, whatever it might be, and you find that they are under investigation for something, that they're not allowed to go back to their regular work duties, all of this, and that their DBS was removed, that immediately says a lot of unspoken things about what kind of things could be going on. And obviously you can think about the kind of things that I'm alluding to here. So although, you know, there's no evidence to point to that, although you're not guilty of any of those crimes, when stuff like this happens, it says a lot of unspoken things which could make it impossible for you to be able to get your reputation back and for you to get yourself innocent in the court of public opinion. So why did they remove, obviously, your DBS? Was it just to do with this whole investigation thing?
It was to do, I mean, if I give you the fullness of this investigation, I was on one of the highest levels of disciplinary that the NHS in Wales has. And during that process, they decided that I wasn't fit to see children, and I was kept in a small room in a distant unit and told not to talk about it. So
this basically your prisoner swap and workplace solitary confinement we're talking about here.
Solitary
so the DBS removed, and when we say here put in workplace solitary confinement, what was that like? What kind of stuff are we talking about that gives you that description of what things that you were being put through?
Whilst the investigation was ongoing, I was kept in a very small room, the size of a large cupboard, I would say, in a unit that I literally knew nobody. Maybe I knew 1 or 2 people, but I was told that I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody. I wasn't allowed to tell them why I was in that unit. I was told to go and summarize the NICE guidelines, which is basically saying, you think you're so clever, you know. And I did what they'd asked within a week and said, what do you want me to do now? And I didn't get any response. And I was kept there, I think, from around about the April time until July. And they didn't tell me what was going on. And I found out afterwards that I was cleared in around about the May time, that they had found no evidence against me. Although I was never even given the chance to give any evidence I wasn't involved in any of this. This all went on above my head. But I was still kept there until the July time.
You mentioned that this could be a tactic that was designed to get inside your head, try and get inside your head and make you overthink things. Because for those of you who again not watching the video, ladies and gentlemen, but listening, and obviously if this camera footage down here survives, you'll see what the kind of scale of the room that we're in. We're in a big meeting room at the moment, and obviously we're talking here. It's kind of funny, when we first done this interview, we were in a much smaller room, just an interview room. And even Lisa said it was smaller than that. So we're talking a very, very small room indeed. And I believe there was a photo you put up on X recently of the room. I think you made a post about the room that you were kept in.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that there was kind of weird. The reason I call it a prisoner swap, ladies and gentlemen, are we okay to say this, that there was basically you were swapped with somebody else from a different unit?
Well, on my travels, because I ended up at that unit another time. There was another investigation that I ended up in. At that one, I was allowed to talk to people, and one of the guys who was in that unit it turns out that he was moved from the unit that I was kept in workplace solitary confinement to my unit, and kept in solitary confinement in my other unit. So it was really bizarre. There was an awful lot of people being investigated. If I just say this, it wasn't just me being investigated; it was every other person was in trouble.
Again, often seems just for the smallest things. And as you mentioned, they took you away from the people who you regularly associate with to basically, although you might have known one or two to talk to, basically a group of strangers, right? So they've estranged you from your regular group. Not only that, they further estranged you because they kept you in this very small room with really nothing to occupy yourself, really, except with the routines that you set up in this room. Very much like a prisoner would set up routines if they were in solitary confinement, ladies and gentlemen. Lisa, from our last conversation, I remember you set up a couple of routines for yourself. So there would be some instances where you might just be able to do a little bit of reading or whatever. Sometimes you might even get a little bit of sleep, and you set up this making sure you pace up and down the room every so often just to get a little bit of exercise, keep the blood flowing and stuff like that. So how did you, was that integral to how you managed in this situation whilst they were trying to play on your emotions, whilst all of this stuff was going on outside, that you had no way to fight your case? And obviously you know that.
I've researched solitary confinement since it happened to me, because it's obviously a bit of an interest to me now. And I think people who survive those sort of incidents, often it's very, very unnerving when it first happens. When what's happening, I didn't know what was happening. You're kept in this room. You're panicky. You know. But I think over a period of about a month, I learnt a pattern of which, I would do the same thing every day, and I'd do my appraisal in the afternoon, and I would read a book maybe in the morning, and that really helped. But I think the big thing that made a difference to me is that there was an occasion when there was a meeting in the unit that I was being kept in, and by this time my friends had discovered what had happened to me. So if I can kind of draw a picture, there was a door in this room, and they were like this in the corridor. They opened the door and put the chairs around the window, so it looked like I was on my own. And I had like 3 visitors come and visit me and say, "What on earth's going on?" And then they had a cup of coffee with me, and I think that one day just made all the difference, because the people who knew had come to rescue me, and that was quite late on. That was quite late on.
Do you know if they had any repercussions because of that? Do you know, like if because they, came and made this a little bit more bearable for you? Do you know if they were then targeted in some way?
They were never caught coming to visit me. It wasn't the only time. I think there's a few times they came to visit me. They were never caught. But
thank God for that.
But I can tell you that none of those people now work for the NHS, and they were also investigated in their own right in a similar way that I was. Hooky malpractice stuff.
So almost witch hunted as well.
I think the health board worked out the people that were likely to be raising concerns and might be difficult, and they weeded people out. That's my guess.
See, that's all. A lot of the times I don't want to talk any down to people that are in the on the front line. I had a very close experience with nearly losing my life, and luckily the people on the front line were very caring for me. I got nothing but good things to say about them. But a lot of it at the top, it seems that a lot of their time, pretty much all of their time, is just focusing on weeding out people that want to speak out against things that are wrong. Not speaking out because you have no reason to do so. Because you got to think, if people are willing to speak out in this way, that's why I always want to allow them to get their stories out. That's why I've spoken to others within the NHS that have done so, is because they're taking a lot of risk doing so, like yourself. pardon me, and other people that I've talked to, you're taking a lot of risk with doing so, as this conversation has alluded to. And you don't do that without good reason, because you're putting your career on the line, you're putting your physical safety potentially on the line, financial security, all of these things, family relationships. Obviously, this stuff would have had the stress you're bringing home from work because of all of these spurious investigations and stuff like that. It's going to spill over into your family life and your home life. So you don't do these kinds of things without good reason.